They fired me at 10:42 on a Tuesday. No warning, no discussion, just a flat corporate takedown in a beige conference room that still smelled like someone's microwaved salmon. I sat there thinking, you really don't know who you're firing, do you? But I stayed quiet. Let them dig their grave. My name's David Ellison. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in Indiana, but I've been out here on the West Coast since I was 23, chasing the kind of tech dreams people either burn out from or build empires on. I've never been flashy. No Tesla, no rooftop parties. I've always been a back-end guy. I like the architecture, the logic, the invisible systems that keep everything running. I was also employee number 1, back when this company was still a side project in a half-empty incubator suite. I was the guy they called to build the infrastructure, set up the servers, negotiate with vendors, design the skeleton of what eventually became a $1 million operation. I worked 16-hour days without complaint. I didn't need titles or public credit. I wanted equity. So yeah, when Rick, the CEO, my so-called boss, looked at me across the table and said, "We're going to have to let you go," I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just watched him squirm through the words like they tasted sour in his mouth. He wouldn't look me in the eye. His gaze flicked between me and Carla from HR, who sat to his left with a folder in front of her and a half-polite, half-apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your position's being phased out," she said, not even pretending to sound sincere. "It's part of a larger operational realignment." I leaned back in the chair. "Realignment," I repeated. "Interesting." 3 months of severance," she added quickly, sliding the folder toward me like a bar tab I hadn't asked for. I glanced down at the manila envelope. I didn't pick it up. I had more than enough money. What I didn't have was patience for this corporate theater. Rick knew I was more than a role to be eliminated. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe the board was feeding him language and he was dumb enough to think he was in control. "I see," I said quietly. Rick shifted in his chair. He wasn't gloating. If anything, he looked vaguely guilty, like a man who didn't quite believe what he was doing, but also didn't have the spine to stop it. "We appreciate everything you've done here, David," he said. I nodded slowly, stood, buttoned my jacket. "Good to know," I said. "I'll be in touch." Carla looked confused. Rick looked relieved. Neither of them asked what I meant. They didn't know I owned 60% of the very thing they thought they were kicking me out of. You'd think a guy who owns most of the profits would be flashy about it, that he'd throw it around in meetings, sign emails with co-founder, even if the paperwork never said so. That was never me. I've always preferred being underestimated. It's quieter that way, and a hell of a lot more useful. The truth is, Rick doesn't know the full story of how this company got built. He thinks he does. He's read the pitch decks, he's sat through the board briefings, he's seen the year 1 spreadsheets. But he wasn't there in that first year, the one where the power got shut off twice because we couldn't cover rent, where I worked out of my truck when the office AC broke, where I spent nights writing code and days fixing bugs just to keep our first client from jumping ship. I met Josh, the original founder, at a hackathon in San Diego in 2014. I was 24, broke, and probably a little too eager. He had the idea, I had the skills. We started small, building a prototype in his garage, sharing ramen packets and Wi-Fi. Josh was brilliant but scatterbrained, a visionary with zero follow-through. He knew it too. That's why we struck a deal. 50-50 on any profits if we ever made it out of beta. It wasn't legally formal at first, just a handshake agreement, a shared Google Doc, and a bottle of whiskey between us. But when things picked up, and we got that first round of seed money, we got it in writing. I still have the original contract stored in an encrypted drive. We never incorporated the way we probably should have. Josh didn't trust lawyers, and I didn't trust VCs. But when the time came to scale, he gave me controlling rights to license and distribute all back-end IP. 60% of net profits on anything built with my code. My code, not the company's. Then, 2 years ago, Josh left. Burned out. Bought a cabin in Colorado and went off-grid. He handed over day-to-day operations to the professionals. That's when Rick came in. Suited up, polished smile, Wharton MBA. The board loved him. He talked like a leader, wore the part well. But Rick never once built a thing. He didn't know that the software stack, the one that made our product scalable, the one that the board kept calling our secret weapon, wasn't owned by the company in the way they assumed. It was licensed, from me, quietly, legally, and with full rights to revoke if the terms were violated. Firing me was a violation, and I had receipts. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was angry, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a pit of bitterness in my chest. It was more like disbelief. The kind you feel when someone walks into your house, steals your jacket, and then has the audacity to tell you to leave. That was Rick. He thought he was cleaning house. He didn't realize he'd just kicked out the guy who still held the deed. The next morning, I got up early. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my old files. Licensing agreements, code ownership rights, the contract Josh signed when he transferred his share of the licensing revenue to me before he left. I double-checked everything. I even had an IP lawyer quietly review the paperwork 3 years ago. Not because I anticipated something like this, but because I don't believe in being caught off guard. I didn't want to burn the place down. I built it. There were good people still working there. Engineers I'd mentored, interns who turned into real-deal devs, admin staff who hustled behind the scenes. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about reminding Rick that some foundations can't be bulldozed without consequences. So I drafted the letter. Formal, but not aggressive. I cited breach of licensing agreement terms due to my wrongful termination without notice, without cause, and without board review, all of which violated the conditions required to continue using my back-end architecture. The result? As of 30 days from the notice, the license would expire, and all software built upon it would be in legal gray territory. I sent it to the company's general counsel, copied the board. I didn't include Rick. Let him find out the way I did. Blindsided. 2 hours later, I got a reply. Not from legal. From one of the board members, an older guy named Victor, who'd been around since the early days. His email was short. Call me. So I did. David, he said after answering on the first ring. Tell me this is a misunderstanding. No, sir, I said. It's not. There was a long pause. You were fired without board consultation. Yes. Rick said it was a consolidation issue. Then he doesn't understand what he just consolidated. He sighed. You realize what this could mean? I do, but I'm not looking to damage the company. I'm looking to protect what I built. He was quiet again, then. Let me talk to the others. Sit tight. I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and finally exhaled. The game wasn't over. It was just starting. By Thursday morning, the panic had set in. I knew because my phone lit up at 7:13 a.m. with a number I recognized but hadn't saved. Rick's direct line. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail. 2 minutes after that, an email from him marked urgent. I didn't open that either. Let him squirm a little. Instead, I met with my lawyer, a quiet guy named Mark, the kind of attorney who didn't say much unless it was important. He read my original agreement again, line by line, and then looked up and said, "You're covered. You could shut them down tomorrow if you wanted." I don't want to kill it, I said. I just want things corrected, properly. Rick wasn't the kind of guy who thought he could be wrong. That's what made this so satisfying. He operated like a man who'd gotten too used to being the smartest in the room. When people like that get corrected, it's not just a hit to the ego, it's an identity crisis. By Friday, I'd gotten a formal letter from the company's legal department requesting a meeting. To explore possible solutions and ensure continuity, it said. They were already hedging. The board must have had a hell of a meeting. I agreed to talk, but not at their office. I suggested neutral ground, a conference space in a hotel downtown. No power plays, no familiar terrain. When I walked into the room, Rick was already there, pale and stiff in a navy suit he clearly hadn't picked out himself. Victor from the board sat beside him, arms crossed. Across the table, their general counsel gave me a polite nod. Rick stood up. "David, good to see you." I didn't shake his hand. I sat down calmly and opened my folder. "Let's make this simple." And then, for the next 30 minutes, I walked them through what they already knew but didn't want to believe. The architecture, the licensing terms, the profit-sharing agreement Josh had transferred to me, the fact that I'd never sold my rights or dissolved my stake. I still owned 60% of the net profits on anything built from my original IP, including the company's core product. "Let's not pretend this is a misunderstanding," I said. "You tried to erase me, but this company was built on what I created. You don't get to fire the foundation and expect the building to stay standing." Rick didn't say much. He looked like he wanted to, but every time he opened his mouth, Victor's glare shut it again. Finally, Victor leaned forward. "What do you want?" I looked him in the eye. "I want it fixed, on paper, properly. My equity, my licensing, my title. And Rick, he goes." The room went quiet. Even Rick turned to him like, "Wait, you're not seriously?" But Victor didn't flinch. "We'll be in touch," he said. And that was it. The shift had started. The call came 3 days later, Sunday night, 8:47 p.m. I was sitting on my balcony with a beer and a blanket across my lap, watching the last bit of daylight fade behind the hills, when my phone buzzed. "Victor," I picked up. "It's done," he said. "Effective immediately." He didn't need to say Rick's name. I knew. I sat in silence for a beat. I wasn't smiling. Not yet. There was something heavier than satisfaction settling over me, like the end of a long storm, when the sun hasn't quite come out, but the winds finally stopped. "What about the rest?" I asked. "You'll get it in writing tomorrow morning," Victor said. "Equity reinstated, licensing agreement extended, your title formalized. You'll be listed as a founding partner in all future documentation." He paused. "We're not going to fight you, David. You're too valuable. And frankly, this never should have happened." I exhaled. Slowly. "Thanks, Victor." He cleared his throat. "You coming back in?" I didn't answer right away. "You don't have to decide tonight," he added. "But we need someone who understands what this company really is, what it was meant to be." I thought about it long after the call ended. I thought about the late nights, the endless bug fixes, the morning coffee runs when no one else showed up. I thought about Rick sitting in that office, pretending like all of it had just materialized under his reign. Coming back meant leading again. It meant meetings, pressure, politics, the same machinery I'd tried to avoid when I stayed behind the curtain all those years. But maybe now, I'd earned the right to lead on my own terms. Not as an employee, not even as a partner, as the architect. By Monday morning, I had the paperwork in my inbox, and there it was, 60% of profits, tied directly to the licensing agreement that couldn't be altered without my consent. A founder's clause was added, along with a board-level advisory seat and an option to step into a permanent executive role if and when I chose to. Rick, meanwhile, was gone. Word spread fast, especially among the people who'd been there in the early days. I got quiet emails, messages from old colleagues. About time, one read. "You should have been the one running this from the beginning," said another. But the message that got me the most came from Carla, the HR rep who'd sat in on my firing. "I'm sorry for how that was handled. Truly. I didn't know. I'm glad it's being made right." It wasn't gloating that filled me. It wasn't revenge. It was relief. A long exhale after years of being in the background, of letting someone else steer what I had quietly built. They'd tried to write me out, but the ink was mine from the start. I didn't walk back into the office for another 2 weeks. I needed time, not just to cool off, but to decide who I wanted to be when I returned. There's something strange about being fired from a place you still partially own. It makes you question how visible you want to be, how much space you're willing to take up. But eventually, I went. Not for them, for me. I walked in on a Monday morning, around 9:15. No fanfare, just a security badge that still worked, the familiar ding of the elevator, and a few double takes from people who definitely thought they'd seen the last of me. Some of them looked nervous. Most looked relieved. The corner office that used to belong to Rick had already been cleaned out. No fake awards on the shelves, no ego-stuffed whiteboards filled with buzzwords. Just an empty desk, a clean chair, and a view that reminded me how far we'd come since the days of paper plates and $3 coffees. I didn't move into that office. I asked for a desk by the engineers instead, where the actual work happened, where code was still being written, problems still being solved. That's where I felt at home. In the following weeks, things began to shift. Meetings were sharper, more grounded. People spoke up more. One of the junior devs told me she finally felt like her ideas were being heard again. That meant more to me than any profit sheet ever could. Victor and I had a quiet lunch a month later. "You're doing good work," he said, stabbing a piece of grilled chicken with his fork. "The board's happy. You could step in formally as COO or even CEO if you wanted. That seat's open now." I smiled politely. "I'm not interested in titles." "Then what are you interested in?" I looked out the window for a moment. The sun was hitting the pavement just right. Warm, steady, unbothered. "Building," I said, "and keeping people from screwing it up again." He chuckled. "Fair enough." We paid the check and parted ways. No handshakes, no pomp. Just two men who understood the cost of letting the wrong people steer the ship. I think about that Tuesday morning sometimes, the day they tried to erase me with a severance packet and a boilerplate script. And I wonder how many other Davids are out there, quietly holding the keys while someone else walks around pretending to be king. What Rick never understood is that legacy isn't about titles or control. It's about roots. And mine ran deeper than any of them ever realized. I didn't just build the system, I was the system. And now, finally, everyone knew it.